say they murdered the richest man in the world, took all of his money. Well,
what year was that, by the way? What year was that when they murdered the Tsar?
Well, that was 1918. They had the Communist Revolution in 1917. And the first thing they did was go in and loot the whole country. They took all the money. And so the result was the new Soviet empire had no operating capital, and they couldn't tax anybody because they had murdered all the people who owned anything. So you couldn't go out and tax the peasants to keep the country running. So they sent up cries of anguish, and people all over the world responded. Woodrow Wilson, our president, he made a speech to Congress in which he said, "It is our duty to help these noble murderers in Moscow," in so many words. And so he first sent them $25 million of his personal war fund, voted to him by Congress to prosecute World War I. And he sent Elihu Root, who, by the way, wrote the charters of all the major foundations. Elihu Root was a lawyer of whom J.P. Morgan said, "When I call in lawyers and I want something done, they give me a lot of reasons why it cannot be done." He said, "When I call in Elihu Root says, 'What do you want me to do?' And I tell him, and he does it." So that's why he became the lawyer for the big bankers in this country.
Now, tell me, Eustace, because there's a lot of people that have said that the banking themselves, that the Communist Revolution was started on Wall Street. Is that a true fact or not, Eustace Mullins?
All of the money for Wall Street, for the Bolshevik Revolution, came from Wall Street, really from Rothschild firms, but it would have been too obvious if the Rothschilds of London were sending all their money over to Russia to help the communists. So they did it through their favorite patsy, which is the American government. And they even formed a special firm on Wall Street in 1916 to finance the Communist Revolution in Russia, which was called American International Corporation. And its directors were Percy Rockefeller, the richest men in the United States, including a financier named George Herbert Walker, who just happened to be the grandfather of George Bush, our president.
Now, how does this George Bush fit in now? George Herbert Walker Bush, the former president, or about to be president of the United States, formerly anyway, how does he fit it with his father, and was it his father and the Rockefellers and the Harrimans and the Brown brothers? Did they all work together as far as this New World Order is concerned?
Well, the New World Order is a group of insiders. It's sort of an international mafia, and they either work together or they get eliminated. I mean, these people have to cooperate because the death sentence is automatic if you don't. And you don't say, "I'm going my way, to heck with you," because if you go your way is straight down. And so George Bush was like a lot of scions of these World Order families. That is, he was unemployable. I mean, if he came in to be interviewed and there were 8 people there, he would be the 8th one that you would hire if you had to hire 8 people. And, you know, Lyndon Johnson...
He should have had 7 others when he was running for president of the United States.
Well, it's too bad it didn't. Lyndon Johnson was quite a perceptive guy. He was a Texas redneck, and he came to Washington and he looked at all these bright young men at the Central Intelligence Agency who were from the wealthiest families in the United States. They were there as a lark. They wanted to play James Bond, and their families would do... and as Lyndon said, he said the CIA is composed of scions of wealthy families whose families would never dare let them near the business because it would be dissolved within 6 weeks. So George Herbert Walker Bush, when he finished at Yale, and they said, "Well, should we put him in the family firm of Brown Brothers Harriman?" They said, "Good God, no, we'll be in the bread lines within 2 months." So they said, let him go work, let him do what everybody else does. Go work for the Central Intelligence Agency and travel around and have fun. So George went to work for the CIA. It's the only job he ever had, just like Bill Buckley, another scion of a wealthy family. Bill Buckley was hired by the CIA when he finished at Yale, Skull and Bones. We're talking about the Brotherhood of Death here, the Skull and Bones crowd, which Bill Buckley and George Bush and all of the partners at Brown Brothers Harriman were members of this Illuminati fraternity established in 1848 as the Russell Trust by Daniel Court Gilman, who also, by the way, later set up the charitable foundations. Gilman was on the board of all of these so-called charitable foundations, which were simply secret instruments of the world order.
So George became a member of the CIA. Matter of fact, he was CIA director in 1976. An interesting thing happened to Eustace in 76, and that was when he met one Saddam Hussein, who became involved in power in Iraq at the time. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, George was always a business partner of Saddam, and he claimed he didn't know him, so he deliberately, when he was on camera, he always mispronounced his name. He always called him Saddam, as though he were trying to call him a sodomite, I don't know. But anyway, they have been business partners that goes way back. And Saddam himself, you know, is worth about $10 billion. He's a player on the world scene. And that's why when George was ranting about getting rid of the new Hitler, and he sent our army over there to do it, they walked away, leaving Saddam Hussein in total control. I don't think he ever heard a gunshot fired during that entire Iraqi war. But to get back to George, he didn't start out with the CIA. He started out as an agent, a secret agent of the CIA, who was running his own oil company called Zapata Oil Company. And, you know, George, when he wanted a name for his company, he wanted a name that really represented what he believed in. So he didn't call it the Thomas Jefferson Oil Company, and he didn't call it the George Washington Oil Company. He looked down at Mexico, where you had a communist revolutionary named General Emiliano Zapata. And Emiliano was quite a bloodthirsty guy. His idea of a good time was to go into a village and line up all the women and children and shoot them. So George said, this is my kind of guy. So he named his oil company Zapata Oil Company, which showed the kind of people that he would like to have around him. And the Zapata Oil Company was never anything but a front for the CIA. They did a lot of work in Mexico and in the Gulf of Mexico for the CIA. And, of course, when you had the supposed attack against Castro to wipe out communism in Cuba, George was in on the planning, and, of course, they bought 2 ships to haul the fighters, freedom fighters, to Cuba. And they named one of them Barbara, after his wife, and they named the other ship Zapata, after his oil company. So George was pretty well inside all the way. And, of course, they never intended to overthrow Castro. You see, when you set up a regime that you control, like in 1917 they set up the Bolshevik regime, and the American taxpayer supported the Soviet empire from 1917 right up till the time it collapsed. And the only reason it collapsed was that the United States was bankrupt. They couldn't send them any more money. So we destroyed communism by going bankrupt ourselves, which I guess is one way of doing it.
You said one time, Eustace, that the Russians have been trying to make it through the winter every winter since the inception of the communism, and we've been helping them through the winter.
Well, the guy who helped them first was Herbert Hoover. After they sent him money, Wilson sent him money, and then they said, we don't have any food. So Herbert Hoover, the great engineer, who was a Rothschild employee, after he had been banned for life from the London Stock Exchange as a thief and an embezzler, and the Rothschild said, boy, we want this guy on our side.
Sure.
So they hired him as a director of Rio Tinto Zinc, one of their family firms. And so then in 1916, the Germans said, look, we can't fight any longer. We don't have any more money. We don't have any more food. And we don't have any more coal. So the Rothschilds said, well, hang on, and we'll see what we can do. So they got Herbert Hoover to inaugurate the German Relief Commission. But since we were at war with Germany, they couldn't well call it the German Relief Commission, so they called it the Belgian Relief Commission. And the Belgians were suddenly were astounded to find out that they were all starving when they had just had the best crop year they ever had. But anyway, the Belgian Relief Commission, which, by the way, was one of the greatest thieveries in the world, Herbert Hoover and his pals who ran this operation, they all came out of it multimillionaires. And Herbert Hoover several times remarked very sourly, some of these days, some prying SOB is going to want to look at our books. Well, no one ever did, and they kept their money. But after the Belgian Relief Commission, which kept the Germany in the World War I for 2 more years and brought a very satisfactory conclusion, Then they called on Herbert to help them out again. They said, look, the Bolsheviks are starving. They've shot all the peasants and the farmers, and they have no food. So Herbert Hoover then organized Russian relief, and he went over and saved the Bolsheviks from total collapse. And somehow, after this, he became known as a great anti-communist, which just shows you what, when you control the media, you can sell any story that you want.
Absolutely. And one of the things that was so sad for me to read about, of course, was when the Bolsheviks did go into the Ukraine, and they did kill so many people. They starved between 6 and 8 million Ukrainians out. And this is the end result of what the America has done, because America itself, this government, not the country, I don't believe the country, Eustace, I don't believe the patriotic people in the country, but this government was responsible for funding situations like this.
Great massacre of the Russian peasants in the early 1930s was deliberately suppressed by Walter Duranty, the chief correspondent in Russia of the New York Times, and he dictated what would be allowed to be sent back to this country. They totally suppressed this so that Franklin D. Roosevelt, as a principal plank of his platform in 1933, that was to give official diplomatic recognition to Soviet Russia so we could send them even more money, of taxpayers' money, than they'd been doing before. So, but they couldn't do this if the press was going to print a story that 10 to 12 million Russians had been murdered by Stalin. So the story was completely suppressed, and in fact the American people today really don't know whether to believe it or not. There have been several books out about it by Robert Conquest, which are very good, totally documented, but they don't get much play in the media.
Mm-hmm. You know, they had a movie at one time on PBS, but PBS refused to run it in most of its affiliate, and that was Harvest of Despair.
Oh, yes.
It was a television, I think it was about an hour and a half long, or a couple hours anyway, but it showed exactly what happened and the terrible human tragedy that this government, the United States of America government, was involved in by the fact that they supported communism in other parts of the world, namely the Soviet Union at that time. You know, it's interesting to me, Eustace, that over 70 million people have been killed by communism, many by their own people, and we still support governments like that. How can this happen, Eustace Mullins?
Well, you mentioned public broadcasting system, PBS, which to most people in the know, they call it the phony. They say PBS stands for the phony broadcasting system because they're a bunch of goofy left-wingers and homosexuals, and they're so relentlessly far left in their orientation that occasionally some congressman or some senator will point out, has PBS ever published any or run anything which was of a conservative nature? And of course the answer is no. And whenever someone in Washington points this out, why they would have to point it out, I don't know, because all you got to do is turn this phony broadcasting system on, and you can see it for yourself. But whenever a congressman mentions this, they immediately denounce him in the entire press as a hate monger, guy who wants to suppress freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. And of course, there is no freedom of speech on the phony broadcasting system because it's totally left-wing.
Now, we have a number of people, different types of people, different nationalities in this world. We had World War I, we had World War II, we had South Korean War, and then we had Vietnam. Should we have fought any of those wars, Eustace Mullins? Was there a real reason? And what was the end result of us being involved in, say, World War I and World War II?
Well, John, you have to understand what wars are. Wars are carefully staged productions. Now, these are all carefully staged, and they did what they were supposed to do, and they had a good audience, and so I think they were successful. But to say that these wars were about anything, that they had some particular philosophy of government opposing another philosophy of government is total nonsense. These were world order productions, and as I say, they were carefully staged. Both sides were set up to perform in a certain manner, and the outcome was always predetermined. In other words, you were looking at a staged production, which you had already seen many times, a sort of a soap opera, and you knew how it was going to come out before it even started.
Now, Eustace, you're a veteran, and I'm a veteran. And I know when I went in the service, I was just about as patriotic as anybody could possibly be. That's the way that I felt anyway. And, you know, I saw things in the service, Eustace Mullins, that would lead me to believe that I still love my country, don't get me wrong, but it's this government that I don't think that I'd ever fight for again, because you just kill a lot of people, raise a lot of debt, raise a lot of taxes. I come back, the people are far worse off than they ever were before, and we seem to be enslaving ourselves. Is this true, or am I imagining things?
Oh, you're not imagining anything. In fact, I was in the Air Force during World War II, and I can't say that we were very patriotic, because during our basic training down here at Miami